Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. It is Tuesday, October 15th, 2024. I am John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine, and we are 3 weeks away from the election. And with me to discuss that and other matters, we have senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
Media commentary columnist Christine Rosen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John.
And Washington commentary columnist Matthew Continetti. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John.
Abe Greenwald is out today. Sometime today or early tomorrow, we will have up the contents of our November issue. The cover line is the October 8th Jews, and it is a series of articles. Bret Stephens, Meir Soloveichik, Jonathan Schanzer, and others discussing the change in the temperament and purpose of the Jewish people in over the course of the past year, and particularly the change in mood since the strikes against Iran and Hezbollah over the summer and in the past month. So we're very excited about this issue, and Matt has a piece. Christine has two pieces in this issue. She has her regular column and a vibrant.
We'll go with that.
You trying to shame me, John?
A vibrant discussion of Hillary Clinton.
You're always vibrant, Matt.
Matt's very vibrant, but this is a piece about Hillary Clinton's new book, which has a title in lowercase like E.E. Cummings, and they're the comparisons to E.E. Cummings and the comparisons to Hillary Clinton's own pathetic series of memoirs begin. So that is another thrilling thing to take a look at. So as we are 3 weeks from the election, we did spend yesterday talking about this, this question of where things are, whether Harris has stalled out, all of that. The Harris campaign seems to have made the decision that it wants to spend at least the next couple of days, if not the next week, harping on a very, very potent, what they think is a very potent theme, which is that Trump is crazy. Trump is crazy. He is crazy. He is unstable. He's really unstable. He's so unstable, and he's really unstable. And I'm thinking, if you would, that it's a little early for this, but they are going back to their greatest hits from 2 months ago. Like, this campaign's been on like for 2.5 months, right? I think it was late July that she became the candidate of the party. And they're weird and he's crazy was sort of the first message, right? That was kind of the first week of messages, is that she was joy and he was nuts. And that, of course, they had such a great time with this joy message and everything going on, and all the coverage, and she, her favorability rating skyrocketed. And it's almost like, rather than advancing forward with a message that they can take them to election day that might be policy driven, it's more like they're retreating to hey, remember that great moment when we were having such a fantastic time calling Trump crazy? Or maybe they have a lot of focus groups and a lot of information that suggests that this is the way to get to those 6 to 7% of voters who are going to decide the election. I don't know which.
Well, there are some ironies here with Harris's message yesterday at her campaign stop. Among them is that with each passing day, the Harris campaign becomes more like the Trump campaign, because, she's had the tentpole rallies, just like Trump. She does the trolling, just like Trump used to do and still does. And yesterday she debuted a large screen Jumbotron video clip series, just like Trump has been doing as well. So that's number one. Number two is that this move to stress Trump's instability and dangerous nature comes at a time when we're hearing all these reports of tension between the Harris and Biden camps. And so it's ironic that even though there's bad blood between Team Harris and Team Biden, Team Harris seems to be adopting what was Biden's strategy for much of the campaign while he was the nominee, which was that Trump is a threat. Trump is a threat to democracy. And here she is in the home stretch taking that up as well. And I'd say the third thing is the Trump is unhinged Trump is extreme, has legs for two reasons. One is Trump says things that are kind of nuts when you pay attention to them. And the other is the media loves this storyline. And so they're going to amplify everything Harris says when she talks about the danger of Trump. The issue is people have been talking about Trump's extremity and Trump's unhinged self for almost a decade now, and it doesn't seem to have really affect his stature in American politics.
No, it affects the down ballot people, right? It affects other Republicans we saw in midterms. You can use the Carrie Lake is crazy and hold her to, 40% probably, but you can't hold Trump to 40% by saying Trump is crazy. That's been the thing, that it works for everybody but Trump, that people don't want in Pennsylvania, and these other places that Trump handpicked. In Georgia, handpicked these Republican nominees in Senate races and gubernatorial races. They did not do well in states they would have done much better in otherwise. And in places like Georgia, you had voters actually picking and choosing, and in Arizona as well. I think in Arizona, you had like the state treasurer won. The Republicans won the state treasurer position and lost all the others on the ballot, which was a hilarious example of dividing the ballot. But it was clear that they were basically like, we're looking for Republicans who aren't crazy because we'd rather the Republicans who aren't crazy be in charge, and that does not work on Trump.
Right, but of course, with the exception of Dr. Oz in Pennsylvania, who was a specific kind of candidate. The people who were voted down in 2022 were crazy. Like, they were crazy in and of themselves. They didn't need Trump. They weren't just a stand-in for Trump. Like, that was actually a choice. Carrie Lake, Herschel Walker, Doug Mastriano, like that. These were these were extremist lunatics. And we have a couple of examples of this, or at least one big one, in the gubernatorial race in North Carolina with Mark Robinson, who is exactly the model that you're talking about, and that does represent an X factor in what might happen on November 5th, given that state is so close, or is possibly a swing state. I think it's not true that the Trump is crazy message doesn't play. It does play. It just may be played out. I mean, Trump is crazy. Trump is a threat to democracy. Trump is the problem, is the core binding glue of the Democratic effort to retain the presidency. There is almost nothing else. They're not running on they mention it. They're not running on their economic record. They're not running on their environmental. They're not running on anything. And when they need to talk, this is what they've settled on.
But this has to be a source of enormous frustration for the Kamala Harris campaign. I think Matt's right to say that they're harking back suddenly to these themes from Brat Summer, which didn't really have legs past the convention, because I think it's because they made the mistake of not putting her out in front of the media when she experienced that bump. And so now the joy talk is really starting to curdle. I think she mentioned that in her appeal to black male voters the other day, that she wants to make it easier, wants to legalize marijuana because that brings joy to people's lives. I'm like, this is just like, the joy thing has become meaningless. But Trump does say unhinged, dangerous, dark things all the time. I guess, we've always argued we tend to focus on Harris because she's less of a known quantity. He's, in his base, is baking into the system and into their decision making the fact that he does seem very unhinged at times. His performance at his recent rally is a little worrisome, and she's added not just that he's dangerous to democracy, but that he's old, perhaps feeble, and she's bringing the age thing has also kind of crept into a lot of her rhetoric, which is also dangerous for her because, as we know, she's been covering for an old and decrepit world leader for a few years now. So, but I do think I think it's a bit of a sign of desperation for her that she's focusing on those themes again, rather than trying to come up with a message about the economy.
I think it depends on what audience you're talking about. I agree, John, that the Trump is dangerous rhetoric works for a certain type of voter. They tend to be Democrats They tend to be college educated or post-college educated white voters. They tend to be more liberal. They tend to be very aware and plugged in. And these are voters, by the way, who are very likely to vote in November. And so it's possible that we are preparing for something like 2022, where people expect, oh boy, it's going to be close and the Republicans are on offense. And then we wake up the day after the election, we find the Democrats actually did pretty well. Now, look, I don't think the Democrats are going to win the Senate. So when I wake up to Axios this morning to see the headline, "What if Harris sweeps the election?" I have a big grain of salt there. But I do think that this is still Kamala Harris's race to lose. Now, I've talked about the one audience where the democracy rhetoric works, where the Trump is dangerous rhetoric works. But there are a whole lot of other audiences where I say it just doesn't have any effect. Nate Cohn of the New York Times had an interesting piece over the weekend where he said, well, why is it that so many minority voters are warming up to Trump? I mean, this is something that we see again and again and again in polls. Our friend Harry Enton has just pointed out the other day that Trump at the moment is on track to put up the best performance among African Americans since 1960 and among Latinos, Hispanic Americans, at least since 2004, if not more. And in his article, I'm back to Nate Cohn, Nate says, look, liberals hear dog whistles every time Trump speaks about race or ethnicity. And that's just not what actual racial and ethnic minorities hear. They hear something different. They hear authenticity. They hear just Trump talking. And he goes on, when Trump talks, for these voters, like many other voters, like many Republican voters, all Republican voters, and like many independents, and we see that Trump's leading among independents as well, they hear Trump talk and say crazy things, and it's just like, well, there he is, there he goes again, and or it's kind of funny, or it's entertaining. Let's see what Donald Trump has to say today. It's a show. I'm not saying that it's good that he's saying these things. Far from it. I'm just explaining why I don't think it quite has quite the punch that maybe it did when he first showed up on the scene.
And there's another possibility, right? That when they hear Donald Trump say crazy things, they say it's bad, but it's not more important than the economy because I'm a wage worker. I need this work. And that's something we've heard a lot too, which is like, no, I don't like that he talks about, going into the locker room, the way he did in that leak tape in 2016. That stuff really did bother voters who voted for him because other stuff outweighed.
When you have two candidates who are equally unpopular and their unpopularity is greater than their popularity, you were talking about an electorate that is saying, I don't really like either of these people very much. Now, that's not true in aggregate. Like there are people who love Trump and there are people who seem to love Harris, and that is obviously a very serious thing, but they're getting, each of them, according to the latest polls, is going to get 93% of the base vote of their party. So they have solidified the control of their parties, and other people, everybody else doesn't really like them very much. So as Seth says, you're making a choice between two relatively unpalatable candidates, and therefore, yeah, fine, tell people that Trump is crazy. Maybe that'll stick. Maybe you'll remind them of the thing that they didn't like about him, but they kind of don't like him already. And he's trying to remind them or encourage them to believe that A, she's a continuation of the Biden administration, which they don't like, and that she's too liberal, which they don't like. And so you have these two different approaches. She's not really saying, except on abortion, which is not nothing, but I mean, she is not saying he is too conservative. I mean, the Project 2025 stuff was a way of framing he's too conservative with a pithy soundbite to say he's going to implement extremist policies that are horrifying. And they seem to have dropped it. So either they got out of it what they expected to get, or they got more out of it than they expected to get, and it no longer has potency or saliency, or they know that none of that matters. Like if you're going to vote for Trump because you thought that things were better when he was president than you were when Biden was president, saying, you know what he's going to be in 2025 is he's going to be himself. That's not necessarily the worst message for him. I mean, I don't want to overthink this or think that they're sitting around being Talmudic about this. I'm just saying they do bring people in by the thousands into little rooms and have them push dials and bars and answer questions and focus groups and all of that. And they know what works and doesn't work.
But there's also one other theme here, and I think it speaks to what the tone and language used by former President Obama when he's been out stumping for Kamala Harris recently. And there is this in the Democratic Party, there is this really strong strain of elite disdain for people who don't get with the program and understand that they know what's best. And there was a lot of that in Obama's talk, especially when he was directing it at Black Men, the group that Harris is really reaching out for. All of her surrogates are kind of undermining her message in a way that's quite harmful. Bill Clinton goes out and says, yeah, you know, that poor nursing student would have been murdered if we had a secure border. I mean, they're kind of, nobody's on the same script, but that's her fault because her campaign doesn't have a consistent script. But I do think that elite disdain, that scolding tone that Obama has always embraced, but as we're reminded of it recently, that does not play well with a lot of voters, even on the Democratic Party side, particularly African-American men who do not have a college education and who are, again, looking at issues that have nothing to do with, joy or Trump being crazy. They're worried about economic issues and security issues.
Well, that joy is an interesting thing because I think you have to kind of drop the joy a bit to say, the dark night of fascism is descending upon the continent. And also last night we watched video of Trump dancing to YMCA. So there might be a bit of a joy switcheroo. She might not get to have both.
I just think it's remarkable how they're panicking about Black men this late in the election. I mean, if you just think about the events of the past week, Christine mentioned Obama's visit to a campaign office in Philadelphia, where he delivered a bitter clinger lecture to a group of Black volunteers for Kamala Harris. He bitter clinged African-American voters, which, I mean, I did not have that on my bingo card for 2024. He said that the reason that Black men are not more excited to vote for Kamala Harris is misogyny. And he singled out the, I quote, brothers as he was talking. It was the most condescending, typical Obama professorial lecture, holier than thou junk that I've, has caused me agita now for going on 2 decades. Then we get the news that Harris has scheduled an interview with the Breakfast Club, the very popular Black radio program hosted by Charlemagne the God. As an aside, John, the next time you introduce me to this podcast, I'd like you to introduce me as Continetti the God, because, that's not what Charlemagne's parents named him. Somehow he just decided to be that everyone has to refer to him as the God. I don't know why we have to play this game.
We have
Get
Dr.
in line.
Dre.
I've been trying to be Czarina. I want to be Czarina first.
I
don't want to be called doctor.
Call you doctor.
No,
Christine.
Please don't do that. I want Czarina. I've been lobbying for this for years. Anyway.
Okay, Christine the Czarina, Continetti the God.
People on the left are very good at naming themselves.
I don't know. Everybody's gonna get one.
The left is very good at slogans. And they're very good at forcing everyone to refer to them by whatever they would like to be called. In any case,
why Trump was so successful.
By the way, can I ask another question about the appeal to Black men? Because there is desperation,
and she's going to be on the program today. That'll be interesting. Okay. Just remember, before you ask your question, how her interview on the Breakfast Club went the last time she ran for
total
president.
Implosion.
It was a disaster.
Yeah. Okay. So,
his name, by the way, his given name is Leonard Larry.
Well, now you know why. Now you know why he changed it. That's like in A Star Is Born.
Leonard Larry.
Her original name is Mildred Plotka. No, that's 20th century. Anyway, why
Leonard Larry McKelvey.
Leonard Larry McKelvey. Okay, Leonard McKelvey isn't, it's not hip, but that's not so terrible. Anyway, so Obama gives that hectoring lecture, which does have the professoriate, the elite professoriate, mixed in with the black preacher hectoring people about their immorality, which Jesse Jackson used to do great effect when he was trying to be a self-actualizer and talk about how black men needed to take responsibility for their own lives. So he is sort of like, don't you be letting Trump win. What's the matter with you, Pete? Like, how are you doing this? What's the matter with you? Don't you know who your enemies are and all of that? So he's combining different traditions, let's say, and I think in a pretty unholy stew. She is doing something that I think is insanely condescending, and that is she is proposing an opportunity agenda for black men. Okay, that is literally a document that her campaign put out yesterday. And here it includes 1 million fully forgivable loans to black business owners. Now,
that's unconstitutional.
Aside from the fact that that is insanely unconstitutional, and that's why I'm saying, I think, like, who is she kidding? You think people are stupid? You think they don't know that they're not going to get a loan specially for black men? They don't know that she's like handing them a bill of goods. Like, that's ridiculous. She is showing such contempt for the people that she wants to vote for her. It's sort of startling. And the one thing that you can say about Trump when he talks about his issues and appeals to a very small but growing sliver of minority voters in the black and Latino communities, he is not changing his message up to get them. He did that a little bit during his presidency when he partnered with Kim Kardashian and Kanye, great moment, on prison reform and stuff like that, and sort of did some version of what he is doing with Jewish voters, which is I'm so great for you. You should have your head examined if you don't vote for me. But he's not really doing that. He's just talking about what he talks about, and some of it seems to be peeling away enough voters from the Democratic coalition to terrify the Democrats, who are now doing what they do, which is throwing money at, not that Trump doesn't do this, but I mean, throwing fully forgivable $20,000 loans to black entrepreneurs, quote, who have a good idea but don't have the resources, connections, or access to capital to get their businesses off the ground. So along with the $25,000 you're going to get for your first-time home that will immediately inflate the cost of every home by $25,000, you're somehow going to get a special black loan. Don't worry, it's only for you. It's a special black loan for black men. I mean, somehow it seems only to be for black men.
The thing about this is they're surprised.
Who is she kidding?
They were shocked that they were unprepared for the fact that running a black candidate was not going to be enough for this. Right? They assumed that, and I think a lot of people assumed that with the switching out Joe Biden for Kamala was going to fix this problem. Trump was very excited about his appeal to black men. He was and minorities in general. Remember, we talked about him holding rallies in Hispanic neighborhoods in Manhattan and places where he was not going to
the Bronx,
or the Bronx, and places like that. So he was sort of reveling in it. And then when they made the switcheroo, Trump would fold that into his complaints, and he would talk himself into his appeal to black voters too, as if he couldn't believe he was about to lose the black voters he just gained because they switched out for a black candidate. And now I think what we're seeing is that it didn't automatically reset all that. She still has to earn their vote, and now they're flailing.
But they should have. They should
yeah.
have known, by the way, because she ran on race when she was in the primary. She publicly shamed Joe Biden, but she's plagiarized a lot of her black experience. I'm sorry, the freedom quote, all these other things. And that's my way of saying I really do want to talk about
Let's go to the plagiarism story. I know, but before we do that, we got to talk about the plagiarism story, which I'm thrilled about, by the way, because I did waste 3 hours of my life 2 weeks ago reading the book that she plagiarized. So at least now
you could have just read Wikipedia.
Reading it, apparently. No, but I did want to say that not only isn't she, doesn't it solve the problem? according to the polling, she is doing worse among Black people than Joe Biden. And the theory, okay, we're just going to apply this poultice to our problem, which is a Black candidate, and we will solve the problem, is yet again this condescension, this idea that everybody is the same. Now, it does mostly solve the problem in the sense that in the end, Democratic Party will get, 80 or 85% of the Black vote. That's sort of like a given. And that should be sufficient unless you have a problem with white people. And she apparently has a problem with white men, and white men make up, I don't know what it is, 36 or 37% of the electorate.
The problem is just with men.
With
doesn't
men,
matter
period, right.
what race or ethnicity you are. Is it's men,
right?
And the Kamala Harris campaign has no idea how to address this problem because all their efforts so far have fallen flat. And now, please,
okay. Now let us discuss our friend Chris Rufo at the Manhattan Institute, who I want to say that he dug deep as was the case.
I thought you were going to read the commercial.
Oh. I'll read the commercial and then we will go to the plagiarism, because I know you guys want to hear us talk about the plagiarism. So this will keep you going through the commercial. And I'm going to have to bring in Seth's help with something as I read the commercial. I'm just warning you, Seth, so pay attention.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry. I'm trying to read something here. Aaron Zevi is a writer and publisher from Toronto, Canada, who has been a longtime fan of the podcast. His short story collections, some in the meta vein of commentary favorite Simon Rich, have been very well reviewed by the likes of Publishers Weekly, Kirkus, and the Jewish Book Council. This week, you can get a free Kindle ebook download of his latest collection, My Imaginary Girlfriend, on Amazon. His name, by the way, is spelled Zevy, Z-E-V-Y, Aaron Zevi. The stories take the reader on a humorous journey which finds Jewish legends such as Theodor Herzl. And here we go. This is why I need Seth's help, because one of my favorite characters from the Haggadah appears here, but I'm going to have to pronounce his name the way I've always pronounced it, and it's clearly wrong, and maybe you can tell me what the proper Hebrew pronunciation is. Rabbi Jose the Galilean. It is spelled Yossi. I mean,
Rabbi Yossi the
Galilean. But in the Glotzer Haggadah that I was raised reading, it's spelled Jose. So it's like Rabbi Jose the Galilean. Okay, Rabbi Yossi the Galilean, fending for themselves in modern day Toronto. That's Herzl and, of course, our friend Rabbi Yossi the Galilean, and hilariously describes how a Babylonian PR firm invented Hanukkah again. The Kindle version is completely free on Amazon this week. That's Aaron Zevi, Z-E-V-Y, and his collection, My Imaginary Girlfriend, on Amazon. Okay. Kamala Harris publishes a book in 2009 called Smart on Crime. In 2024, Chris Rufo of Manhattan Institute and a friend of his run the book through the plagiarism machine. Now, Matt and I have a long connection to the issue of plagiarism as a matter regarding books of high reputation or star power and star quality, because really the effort to take a look at books and see whether they are what they say they are and they're by who they say they're by was sort of inaugurated by the Weekly Standard and by our colleague Fred Barnes who discovered that the work of Stephen Ambrose, the famous popular historian, author of Band of Brothers and others, there were a lot of passages in Stephen Ambrose's work that had been lifted from others. And that was a piece that Fred published, I think, in like 96. And over the course of the next 10, 12 years, every couple of years, there would be another example of this that the Weekly Standard would expose. And that was when there was no plagiarism machine. Now you could literally take a book, feed it into a computer, and then send it through
it's software.
A comparison software, or now AI. My guess is you could do it with AI in a second, and discover that there are passages that appear not only there but somewhere else, as long as that other volume is available in full on the internet, or articles are available in full on the internet. And Christopher Rufo did this with Smart on Crime and has discovered at least 5 passages that are not direct lifts from Wikipedia and other places. And he promises, after the weird response by the mainstream media, that he's not so stupid as to have released everything all at once. He's got more coming on this today. So I'm not going to read. You should look it up. I'm not going to read the comparison passages. But I do want to say that there are 2 things about this. One is I want to read from Smart on Crime, the passage in Smart on Crime. Now, here's what's interesting. This book was published in 2009. Okay. So she was a prosecutor. This book was the announcement of her large-scale political ambitions, because so she was, a district attorney, and then she was going to run for Attorney General of California. And this was like her kind of pre-campaign book. And guess what? She didn't even write it herself. She has a co-author whose name I will now dig up if I can. I'm sorry. Her name is Joan O.C. Hamilton. Joan Oak Hamilton. So first of all, she couldn't even write her own first book, as J.D. Vance very humorously tweeted out yesterday, as the author of a book that I myself wrote myself. This is interesting. Kamala Harris couldn't even write her own book. She went to Wikipedia, but the book is suggestive of some of the reasons why you might not want Kamala Harris to be president. And I'm specifically talking about a section called When Deterrence Works, because the whole thing is myths about crime. And she's going through myths about crime as a prosecutor and what she has learned. And I just want to read this because it is suggestive. There are a number of crimes for which we see a strong documented connection between harsh punishments, namely long sentences, or the publicizing of harsher punishments, and deterrence. The power of deterrence seems to work with reasonably organized people, capable of understanding the risk they're taking, even if they otherwise lack the controls that should keep them in line. Those who know they have a lot to lose are more likely to engage in a cost-benefit analysis of the consequences of a crime. But as much as we would like to believe otherwise, however, we also have to take a clear-eyed look at the limitations of deterrence. There are perpetrators of financial fraud and disseminators of toxic pollution who sometimes look at the fines involved in being caught and simply factor them into the cost of doing business. Next, consider serious and violent crime. I believe some violent predators are deterred by our combination of attention on them, but most of the rapes, murders, and other crimes of high emotion are perpetrated by people who are emotionally out of control, convinced they are justified in the act, or believe they won't be caught, so the punishment won't apply. More put, they are so angry, delusional, or arrogant that they don't care about the punishment. Consequently, it is difficult to design the proper deterrence strategy. So guess what? Let's not have one. Kamala Harris, in her first book, in her first major public policy statement, is attacking the concept of deterrence on the grounds that there are people who are not really deterred by deterrence because they're just too stupid or too emotional to be deterred. And she's talking about this totally in relation to crime, but we are literally engaged in this moment the world is engaged in 2 major wars that involve the reestablishment of deterrence as the way to prevent further violence and escalations of violence. One in Gaza and with Hezbollah, and one in Ukraine, where the Ukrainians are attempting to push the Russians back and reestablish their border and say, we are raising the cost of your adventurism so high that you're just going to stop doing it once we win this, if we are allowed to win this. So I think it's neat and proper that Chris Rufo has highlighted Smart on Crime, because it is a reminder of who Kamala Harris is at her root.
It's there's a lot going on here. The first is she published a book under her name, which I was unaware of. So that was headline for me
She's published two. She also published a
that's, I
memoir.
mean, well, what's interesting about this
Guess
is that
what? She loves the middle class. She had a second mother.
she grew up in a middle class
And she
family.
said freedom.
And she wrote a book about crime before she came to the Senate. Mostly it's when you arrive at the Senate that you start writing books. So, because there's nothing much else to do. But she wrote this book before. So that was takeaway number one. Takeaway number two is the plagiarism aside, the crime stuff is interesting because this is an issue on which Harris is running behind Donald Trump. And it's why we saw such a big messaging push earlier this month from the administration informing Americans that crime is down over the past year. But in the lived experience of many Americans, especially those living in cities, it doesn't seem like crime is down because there's a lot of petty crime, there's a lot of disorder in the cities, and there's a lot of social costs that have been imposed by the migration from the southern border into where migrants arrive in urban environments, and the entire infrastructure of government has to turn to address the problems of health, education, housing, and social assistance, among others. So crime is a vulnerability for her. And then, John, I thought what you said about foreign policy is very interesting, too, because as much as foreign policy is in the background of this campaign, Harris has spoken very little about it. And this is the, top job of the president of the United States, is to be the commander-in-chief of the U.S. Armed Forces and to be active on the world stage. And we just have the faintest idea of how she would approach Russia, China, and we have maybe a little bit of a better idea about how she'd approach Iran, but it's the wrong approach. So if only she needs to write another book quickly to let us know who she would plagiarize for foreign policy from before we have to vote.
Well, the one place those overlap, foreign policy and crime, I think, is in the general disorder around the Intifada and the protests in the streets about the situation in Gaza, too, because I think that's also bothering people because it's not just on college campuses, not that that's nothing, but if people are getting harassed at, a bagel shop or a deli or whatever, it's spread through the streets of these major cities. And I think that they go hand in hand because people think she's not going to want to crack down on that kind of disorder because of her coalition.
There's two other problems for her perception-wise, I think, with this revelation of plagiarism that are worth considering as well. I think most people assume that politicians don't write their books themselves and have ghostwriters or co-authors, whatever. So I don't think the revelation that she didn't write the book is that interesting. Although I'm with Matt, I had no idea she'd published any books. But it's two things. One, we've had a whole bunch of plagiarism, high-profile plagiarism revelations about people in very high positions of power, like Claudine Gay at Harvard and elsewhere, who were considered, quote unquote, DEI hires, people who got their jobs because of their identity rather than because of their qualifications. So this kind of fits that narrative as well, right? She's been called a DEI hire as well. I don't think that's entirely fair, but that is sort of a messaging thing.
I don't know. What did Biden say? He said, I'm going to pick a black woman.
Exactly.
And then he said for a black woman.
But the other problem is that I think this also gives a little more grounding to this idea that she's this very hollow person, right? She can't even write her own book. These were press releases in Wikipedia she's plagiarizing from. I mean, at least go to a scholarly book and, cull it from there. I mean, it's very, her hollowness, her intellectual and policy hollowness is pretty consistent here. So I don't think either of these help her. And I think it's why we're seeing the mainstream media try to run cover for her on this in the immediate aftermath, but it will not last. I don't think it's possible.
This is really shocking. I mean, this is genuinely shocking. And very few things shock me about media coverage. But writers and plagiarism is kind of a deep thing for us because, we like labor over our work, right? And the people who produce newspaper articles labor over their newspaper articles, and people who write, writing is not, it's not we're not coal miners, and I don't want to, like romanticize the difficulty of, putting pen to paper or, things on a keyboard. But the minimum for what it means to be a writer is that you write your own sentences that are attached to your name, or at least that you have a collaborative process with others, editors, other reporters, things like that, where the work that is produced is work that is suitably identified as yours. And that is what plagiarism violates. And if there is one thing that is a cardinal crime, it is theft. Plagiarism is theft. It is a theft of somebody else's words. And so the New York Times, in its story, which is Christopher Rufo pounces on allegations of Kamala Harris's plagiarism, features a supposed plagiarism expert saying, well, 5 instances of plagiarism isn't really that much. And congratulations, New York Times, you have just now published in your own pages a way in which people are now going to be able to sue you for, like, if you want to fire somebody because you discovered that they plagiarized something and that they Ruth Shaleeded something, going to say, well, in your own pages, you said that it's okay to do it 5 times.
Well, if it's a Democrat, if it was Rand Paul or Melania Trump, then it's still a violation.
I mean, plagiarism killed Joe Biden's first presidential campaign in '88.
That's right.
And it ended the presidency of Claudine Gay at Harvard University. But, if it's Kamala Harris with 3 weeks left before the election, mistakes happen. She didn't actually write the book anyway. The burden should be on her ghostwriter.
Look, people do get, like, Fareed Zakaria got away with it. Fareed Zakaria,
he went into the penalty box for a little bit.
Okay,
and then he came out, and he's better than ever.
They throw the researchers and co-authors and ghostwriters under the bus first, and that is what angers me about her immediate reaction. They're gonna toss her co-author under the bus because that's the convenient thing to do, and that is
because nobody believes that she can write a book.
Well, exactly.
But okay,
somebody else obviously wrote it. Is the reaction?
I think that we may be taking this from an overly sophisticated, elitist position. That is to say, I don't know that the general run of American thinks that when there is a book in a bookstore that says Kamala Harris, smart on crime, that person says, oh, she didn't write that book, her ghostwriter wrote it. Like, first of all, 40 years ago, it was a news story that people had speechwriters, and I'm not kidding. Daniel Shore, once of NPR, once did a story because he was horrified to discover that Ronald Reagan had cards that said things like, thank you all for being here, and I want to point out that Mayor Whitlington of Wilmette is here, and what a great job you're doing, Mayor. And it's like, oh my God, you see, he doesn't even know how to thank people in the audience. It has to be on paper in front of them. And it was like a 2-day story that the president of the United States, like, waving at the, people in the crowd, wasn't allowed to have, like, note cards saying, say hello to this guy, say hello to that guy, say hello to the other guy. That is how much the idea was that people were supposed to be responsible for their own words. Granted, that was 40 years ago. We're in a different world now. People understand a lot more and are a lot more cynical and all of that. But
well, there's also the JFK book, the Arthur Schlesinger JFK book, which was
Ted Sorensen.
Ted Sorensen, which was like for a long time, it just had to pretend that JFK wrote that book.
Yeah, that book won a Pulitzer Prize. That was Profiles in Courage, won a Pulitzer Prize. But that was okay. It was the second time that JFK had been the subject of had a ghostwriter, because he had a ghostwriter when he was a senior in college. His father published a book he wrote called While England Slept, under his name.
It was his thesis
at the New York Times. It was his bachelor thesis.
Yeah.
And the New York Times columnist
Joe
Arthur
Kennedy,
Kroc,
the original helicopter parent there, pushing.
Yeah. Arthur Kroc, who was a columnist for the New York Times, rewrote JFK's bachelor thesis so that it could be published, in 1940. So, and then Teddy Kennedy nearly, was thrown out of Harvard nearly for cheating on his Spanish final. So this is a family disease. But anyway, however you want to slice it, plagiarism is not good. And if you're caught at it, it's very hard to make a reckoning for it. Like Ruth Shalit 30 years ago at the New Republic had to say things like, there's the bottom of my notes, and I was taking notes, and it was at the bottom, and I was moving paragraphs around, and so I didn't know that I had done this, or I had done that, and that's crazy, because of course you know what you wrote and what you didn't write, unless you're, senile, and she was 22, so she wasn't senile, and everybody who saw that knew that this was something that could not, be allowed to stand if you were a publication of any integrity whatsoever. And the cover-up of Kamala Harris here is not going to fly. This is actually, I think, Christine, it reinforces everything. She's an empty suit. She's a hollow vessel. At the very beginning of her career, when she was a nobody, she couldn't even write her own book, let alone that she was, the vice president, whenever it was that when in 2018 she wrote her memoir, which is terrible, by the way. Also spent like 4 hours reading that, and is where all of the argle bargle about her past comes from. Though of course she says almost nothing about anything of interest, or the fact that she spent her formative teenage years in Canada, which is not something. She mentions it, but in a paragraph. Kind of big. I'm sorry. Like, this is not nothing. And Trump will harp on it, and then they'll say, well, you plagiarized you. And he was like, yeah, but I never pretended I didn't. That's the other thing about Trump. Like, if they say Tony Schwartz wrote the Art of the Deal, he'll say, of course Tony Schwartz wrote Art of the Deal. I'm on every page. I dictated it. I did this, I did that. But of course he did. I was very busy. I was too busy to write it. And, Melania is too busy to write her book.
That's why they have to say Trump is a danger to democracy. That's going to crowd out the plagiarism scandal. This is what's going to happen, John. I'm sorry to disappoint you. I know how angry you are over this. But you're seizing on it. You're seizing on this issue of plagiarism.
And by the way, the Trump is dangerous argument, that's not hers either. Right. She plagiarized the Trump is dangerous.
So can we spend 3 minutes on the Trump is a danger to democracy? So here's I think the problem with the Trump is a danger to democracy argument, which is, do you feel, how we have the are you better off than you were 4 years ago thing? So look, I think Trump should have been impeached and convicted for January 6th, and that is really where the danger to democracy stuff comes from, right? But it came it was a theme throughout his presidency that he was doing things that were just so outrageous, and the Muslim ban and this and that, and just awful. There is a kind of implicit question that is raised by the Trump is a danger to democracy. This is the last election. He is going to take over. If you remove January 6th, and maybe you can't, but if you do, doesn't this raise the question, do you feel freer now than you did during the Trump presidency? Do you feel like the democracy in the United States is functioning better with Trump out of office than it did with Trump in office? And there, I just don't think that Americans are going to say, man, I feel so much freer. Maybe they could say I feel less free because of the Dobbs decision. Like women can say I feel less free, and those were Trump's appointees to the Supreme Court. So maybe that counts. But that's not really the argument they're making. They're making he's going to go after his political enemies. Well, that is a bad argument for them, because he is somebody who is being pursued in 5 different legal venues.
Because all his friends are in jail.
Yeah. So I don't know. What do you guys think of that? I mean, I just don't know that it's really. I mean, if you really want people to engage with the issue and think about it,
Right.
they already had Trump as president. So was he a danger to democracy?
It didn't seem
then?
to be working when Biden was using it, and I just think voters pay more attention to the reality of their everyday lives, and that what they see and what they experience is prices are higher under Biden than they were under Trump. There are big problems at the border that are affecting cities that were not the case under Trump. The world's a mess. That was not the case under Trump. And so to hear about the threat to democracy is just something that's not at the top of their minds, I think, for most voters. And yeah, I mean, you can play this game and you can talk about lawfare and you can talk about the restrictions on free speech. You can talk about the Overton window and how the media control everything that we talk about and what's permitted. But at the end of the day, if Trump wins this election, I think it will be because the economy matters most.
Well, there's also an implicit thing that they're saying when they talk about democracy ending, this being the last election if Trump is reelected, and that's that they don't have faith in our system of checks and balances. They don't have faith in our government. They don't have faith in what the founders created. The founders very clear that they believed that the president could always potentially be a threat to democracy. That is why the power of the executive is limited. That is why we have other branches who have specific roles to balance out the power that the executive has, because we never wanted a king. And I think the Democrats' message on democracy has undermined people and eroded people's trust in what is already, an erosion of trust over the years in our institutions. And so on the one hand, they're like, he's dark. He wants us to go back to the dark ages. It's terrible. We're about joy. We're not going back. And yet that messaging in particular is quite negative.
Yeah, I should add, I mean, I think that danger to democracy message would carry more weight if the Democrats were not advocating fundamental changes in the Supreme Court and the judiciary. Yes. We're not advocating, like the vice presidential nominee Tim Walz did in a private setting just last week, the abolition of the Electoral College. And if Democratic intellectuals, liberal intellectuals, were not mounting a sustained campaign against the United States Constitution, all of these elite liberal law professors come out with book after book about how the Constitution is terrible. It's the source of all of our problems, and it has to be radically revised. So, look, I think there are concerns about a second Trump administration. I don't want to downplay them, but at the same time, I would take the argument from Harris more seriously if she weren't advocating all these fundamental changes in the U.S. constitutional structure herself.
Right. And I think that the refusal, look, let's go back to deterrence. The reason that Trump needed to be impeached and convicted and wasn't, for bad reasons and for reasons that we now, I think, can see his, the fact that he remains on the stage when he probably shouldn't is itself an example of this, is deterrence. The point of punishing Trump for January 6th was to say, behave like this if you are a future president and there is a precedent for you, like, don't go there. Don't go where he has gone. Let us not make this the new normal, right? That didn't happen. But what happened was Biden was sworn in on January 20th. The vice president of the United States did not obey whatever lunatic idea the Trump people had that he wouldn't accept the electoral ballots. 63 lawsuits to try to overturn the results in states and deal with voting irregularities and this and that and the other thing failed. One state played games with the election count. That was Pennsylvania. Sam Alito and others said, this is something that we really should probably take a look at. They changed the rules at the end of the game in a way that is disturbing, but that's one state out of 50. And if the result in Pennsylvania had been overturned, Biden would still be the president of the United States.
And the people involved with him are getting punished, right? I mean, Rudy Giuliani is having his assets seized. because he made allegations like this. People
Sidney
are getting
Powell.
disbarred.
Yeah.
Sidney Powell, right? People are going to jail. People are getting disbarred. People are,
Yeah.
declaring bankruptcy to avoid having to pay out lawsuits. I mean, people are really getting knocked around for having advocated this.
But we should look. I think it's important because we think and talk about these politicians a lot. I mean, it's terrible that one of our options on the ballot is someone who might create that chaos all over again. That's bad. Like he's not someone
It is bad.
It's bad. So
it is bad. Yeah. And I don't want to say it's not bad. Like, that's why I couldn't end this with the system held, and the system and it held because our system is so incredibly complex, right? 50 states, 3,300 counties, municipalities, multiple election systems with different laws, different rules, different approaches, different ways you count electors, 2 different states that don't assign all the electors, to the winner takes all system. And the whole point of this thickness is in the Constitution itself, which is to make it impossible for that king to arise, to make it impossible for a person. And who is responsible for eroding our understanding of those constitutional checks and balances? And I'm sorry, it is liberals. It is not conservatives. It is liberals who are impatient with the complexities and hardness and difficulties of making policy in Washington in particular. And since the progressive era, and then through the imperial presidency of JFK and all they want to do is simplify their ability to work their will. And Barack Obama was the worst of all of them theoretically, because he did it out in the open. He said, I don't care that something that I said was unconstitutional is unconstitutional. We can't wait. I have a pen and a phone, and I am going to make unconstitutional policy from the executive branch, legislate from the executive, and then dare you to get courts to overturn me. And they did. But he opened a Pandora's box that had already been, cracked open a teeny bit, and then opened it full way. And Trump just walked right through. I'm a box and a door. Like he walked through the door that Obama opened. And yeah, is it bad? He was bad. He did it too. And it's bad. And he wants to do bad things. But Biden has done it throughout his presidency. The student loan thing. I mean, there are 10 things he said, I can't do the student loan thing. And then he did it because they're playing Calvin ball with the Constitution of the United States. And thank God it's there. And yeah, leave it alone. And David French, leave it alone. I'm so outraged that my friend David French wrote this piece saying that there should be term limits on the Supreme Court. Whatever happened? What happened? Congratulations on growing in office, David French, in the New York Times, that you are now proposing demented ideas because they're happy. They make your liberal audience happy. Congratulations. You have trod the road. You're treading the road that so many others have trod before you. And I hope you like your new friends, because it's very intellectually disappointing what has happened there. It's an outrageous and ridiculous argument, and he should be ashamed of himself. And yes, I went there, and I wasn't expecting to. Matt Continetti.
Yes.
Now that I'm calming down.
That's what makes this podcast so fun. You never know where you're going to go.
I didn't know where I was going to go. I was just so angry last night reading this thing that David French wrote, that I couldn't help myself. It's a piece about how there should be term limits on the Supreme Court. You can find it if you want to, and comes up with some extraordinarily bizarre ideas about how this was not what the founders intended, because nobody knew what anybody was going to, and then, you know what? It's amazing. The founders never thought that people would make political hay out of the Supreme Court. Like can we just discuss the 19th century Supreme Court, or do we not have to bother? Anyway,
I'm teaching that right now.
Are you?
American University. Yes. I mean, the Taney Court, Marshall before
very distinguished.
Yeah, they weren't involved in politics at all. Right.
Yeah. Very distinct. A lot of very serious legal thinkers there on that court. Really just magnificent. Anyway, those courts. Anyway,
I'm going to make a recommendation today.
Yes, please.
Thank you. I'm ready to recommend this series. It's not going to be for everybody. Just going to warn you. but I have watched the first 2 episodes of The Penguin on HBO, and they're very good. And I'm looking forward to the 3rd episode, which is out now. This is a show that picks a minor character from the latest Batman movie. This is the Batman movie with Robert Pattinson that came out, I think, 2 or 3 years ago. And the character is the Penguin. So played in other Batman series by Danny DeVito and Burgess Meredith, I think, in the original television show, Camping It Up. But in this series, it is played by Colin Farrell, a unrecognizable Colin Farrell. Colin Farrell, the Irish actor, kind of a heartthrob in the Miami Vice movie that Michael.
Kind of a heartthrob.
Yeah.
Colin Farrell is like one of the best looking people on the planet Earth.
Can confirm.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Yes. Well, not in this show, because they give him a makeover where he looks and acts like a mob boss who is the Penguin. He's completely believable. He has this accent that's completely believable. And the show is essentially a Sopranos set in the Batman universe. What's interesting is Batman is never referred to maybe just glancingly in the first episode and never again. And I don't think will make any appearance in the show. It really is a mob drama, and it's gritty and bloody. But Farrell is just fantastic, and the dramatic situations they've set up in the first 2 episodes are gripping, and he has to use his mind, and he's very clever. So I'm enjoying it very much, and I'm ready to recommend it. That's the Batman, not the Batman, the Penguin. The Penguin.
I watched the first
HBO.
episode. I watched the first episode. I thought it was stunning. And, years ago, somebody said, look, the superhero genre is now taking everything over. And so if it's taking everything over, they should do everything with the superhero genre. They should make,
Right.
So they made Captain America Civil War is a 70s conspiracy thriller in the guise of a superhero movie. And this is a mafia.
Yeah, I mean, it is the Sopranos.
Saga.
He has a mother
Yeah.
who he has to go see, and
Yeah. Yeah.
it's not the most original thing in the world.
No.
But his performance is so good,
Yeah.
and it's very cleverly done. And the female lead, the actress's name,
Kristen Milioti.
yeah, she's excellent too. She's kind of
Yes.
a rival. So I do recommend. And in a way, what you mentioned about the comic book genre made me think of Andor, which is a Star Wars series that came out a few years ago that just dealt with one little sliver of this universe and turned it into basically one of the best meditations on politics and intelligence, gathering and such that I've ever watched. So,
and the
similar.
Batman universe is very well set up to do this also, because they did this with storylines and books throughout the comics and graphic novel series, where you would have an entire series that was basically something like this,
Right.
the Long Halloween and stuff like that were basically just, back
but
to
you
the
don't need to, I guess my point is, right,
idea.
you don't need to be a comic book fan. You don't even need to be a Batman fan.
No.
You just need to be kind of interested in gritty mob noir type things and just sit back and enjoy Colin Farrell's performance, because it really is something to behold.
Yeah. The other thing about it, I think, is so it's set in this mythical city that is based on New York. But there is something, mafia dramas are, of course, famously gritty or semi-documentary because it's about crime that's being committed under your nose where you live, or exactly, there's a whole criminal world right next to you, under you, beneath you, running your elevator bank, or the candy store that you buy stuff in is actually
The
part
garbage
of that.
and construction, usually. It's garbage and construction.
So in this
Waste
case,
management.
Right, waste management. So in this case, you actually have a mythical city,
right?
So that it pulls it a little further away from that thing where you're like, the cops wouldn't let him get away with that, or that's not right, or this is a little off, because it's a little fairy tale like, and so the suspension of disbelief that you can really get in some mob things that don't work quite well. It's kind of interesting. Like, that's just not normal. It's a different way of telling a mob story.
Yeah.
And I mean, just thinking that this is the same guy as if you saw the movie The Banshees of Inisherin, where Colin Farrell should have won the Oscar for Best Actor as this sort of blabbermouth, small town Irish idiot whose heart is broken because his best friend says, I don't want to be your friend anymore. My life is too short and you're boring me to death. And how he deals with this. This is the same person is beyond all belief. Like, it's not only a triumph of makeup, also he transforms his body, twists.
Yeah, the way he walks and everything.
Yeah.
And even
It's
little
just-
things like
yeah.
the way he laughs are perfect aspects of this character that if you've watched other Batmans and other Penguins, you see, oh yeah, that is the Penguin. That's how the bird might laugh, right? And but it's so subtle. That's what's so great about it.
Yeah.
I just want to
Anyway.
say before we close, by the way, that the original Gotham City, although obviously it is New York now, the original Gotham City was in Cumberland County, New Jersey. The original DC Comics, when they published their like sort of origin atlas. So South, I just want to say as a South Jersey native or South Jersey native, I just want to represent for South Jersey.
Well, and then there was the weird fact that the original The Dark Knight was filmed in Chicago,
Right.
which so already they're just all the rules are broken. Gotham City is obviously New York. The other crazy thing was when they made some movie, I can't remember which one, and Metropolis is across it's sort of like Metropolis is Brooklyn and Gotham City is Manhattan, and they're
That's
like
wrong.
across the river from each other.
That should not be.
That is okay. Now we're getting into the
Got to
weeds.
get Seth's atlas there. Get that atlas out.
Yeah, get
see
that
where they are.
atlas. Right. Okay. Anyway, thanks for listening. We'll be back tomorrow for Matt and Christine and Seth and the Absent Abe. I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.